verses 27 through 32. The great apostle Paul writes, "Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy way will be guilty of sin against the body and blood of the Lord. So a man should examine himself. In this way he should eat the bread and drink from the cup. For whoever eats and drinks without recognizing the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. That is why many are sick and ill among you, and many have fallen asleep, or as he truly means, have died. If we were properly evaluating ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the Lord, so we may not be condemned with the world." There's several components in this I think are going to be very valuable for us. If we look back at verse 28, Paul writes, "So a man should examine himself." A man should examine himself. There are three things I think that we need to do. If we're going to have 2020 vision this year, we need to start by reviewing. Paul says a man should examine himself. How many times have you looked back on your life or looked back maybe on your last week, last month, and think, that wasn't my finest moment? Some things you look back and say, really kind of embarrassed by that. I know I have. Way too many times. We need to review. We need to examine ourselves. Now, we could always go to someone else, and I could say, "Vicki, how do you think I've done during the last month or the last year? And Faye, how do you think I've done? Mr. McGee, how do you think I've done?" And often people will be very kind, won't they? "You've done a great job. Oh, you've been wonderful." Are they being honest? Totally honest with me? Sometimes yes. Sometimes they're just being kind. And we need to examine ourselves. And we need to do this in a way because the goal is I want to change. I want to improve. I want to make sure that I'm aligned with God. It doesn't seem that we often review ourselves very objectively. USA Today had a report in 2004. Amazon.com had anonymous reviews available for various books, various authors. And some of the reviewers, their anonymity was revealed. There was some sort of breakdown, and their identities were revealed on Amazon's Canadian website. So they got these reviews about these various books, but some of those who had done the review were the authors of the book, and they'd written glowing reviews of their own book. Looks real good until suddenly it's revealed. Paul says, so a man should examine himself. In a letter to the church at Galatia, he wrote, "For anyone considers himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself." So if we're going to examine ourselves, I need to think about this. Am I trying to just make myself into something that I'm not? Do I want to puff myself up? Do I want to look good to myself? But Paul says, if he considers himself to be something when he is nothing, and I truly am nothing. I'm nothing but God's utensil. Now, we like to be liked. I understand that. That's human nature. But the reality is, I am nothing. But Paul continues in verse 4. He says, "But each person should examine his own work." So I would say, let's step back and let's look at 2019. And God, what did I do for you in 2019? Were there some successes that you worked through me to achieve in 2019? Was there something that changed? Was someone's life altogether different because you used me? Did I make myself available, or did I just kind of go through the motions? We need to examine our own work. And that's all I need to do. So if we will say, I'm going to review myself and I want to be honest. I don't want to be like those authors who wrote their own reviews. I want to be honest. If we can do that, things change. Recently, researchers at Johns Hopkins University ran across the notes from a 19th century neurosurgeon named Harvey Cushing. What surprised them was his meticulous self-evaluation and self-criticism. He carefully documented every mistake that he made on the operating table. They said that most people, most doctors, most surgeons, that they want to try to to hide their mistakes, to cover them up, blame someone else perhaps. Not Harvey Cushing. He cared about his mistakes and he was trying to correct them. And they said it was no surprise during his lifetime some of the most profound improvements were made in the field of neurosurgery because of his honest self-evaluation. So maybe I step back and say, God, it was a good year. You used me in a lot of ways, and Lord, I'm thankful that you allowed me to be a part of what you were doing. And then I may step back and say, Lord, I really didn't do anything for you this last year. I went to church and sang and gave, but didn't really do anything for you. If we're going to have 2020 vision, maybe we need to look at two examples of the life of David. For self-evaluation, going back and reviewing what had gone on was important for him. The first is a story that's familiar to us. Saul and his armies, they're out encamped, and the Philistines are on the other side. And each morning, for 40 mornings, this big guy named Goliath shows up. He stands out there and he's yelling across at the Jewish army, and he's saying, hey, send out your best guy. I'm going to fight him, and whoever wins on the other side will concede, and we're going to just make this man-to-man right here. And Saul and all his troops, they're just quaking in their boots. They're so afraid. Well, David's going back and forth, tending to his father's sheep. He's bringing supplies to his brothers who are in Saul's army. He shows up one day, and he hears the giant Goliath out here. And he's asked, what's going on? They said, well, hey, this is what the king will do. Anyone who can beat this man. And David said, hey, I'll take care of him. And Saul brings him in because he's heard about this. And Saul listened and said, you're just a boy. You're just a kid. And David does a review. He does a self-evaluation. David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. So he's saying, Saul, King Saul, God has equipped me. He has allowed me to do these things. This is a review. This is my resume of me as a young shepherd boy, what I have done. And we need that kind of honest self-evaluation, what God has equipped us to do, and maybe what he hasn't. But then we move on to another time in David's life that's not the glowing story of him slaying Goliath. In fact, he's the king, and he has slept with Bathsheba and had her husband killed. Nathan is revealed from God. Nathan is revealed to him who has done this. So Nathan goes to David and says, he gives him a parable, and David says, oh, this is a horrible thing. The man who has done this in this story must die. And Nathan says, you are the man. You're the one who has sinned in this story. And we read in 2 Samuel, David responded to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. He didn't blame. He didn't say, well, it's Bathsheba's fault. If she hadn't been out on that rooftop taking a bath out there, this wouldn't have happened. Her husband should have gone, and when I sent him back home, he should have gone in and slept with her, and this wouldn't have happened. David didn't do any of those things. He simply said, I have sinned against the Lord. When we review our year, we review our day, our week, our month, I need to be honest with myself. God knows what I've done or what I haven't done. I need to be honest with myself as I conduct this review. That's the first step. The second step as we work toward having 2020 vision is to reset. On occasion, you may have a power outage at your home. And typical circuit breaker in a home, it would usually be the reason why you would have that power failure. We've had it occur here at work, at church, when we've been doing some things around here. We get too many items plugged in going one time, a couple of saws. Maybe at home it could be you got a space heater going, you got the curlers going, someone else plugs in the vacuum, it's all on the same circuit, and suddenly everything quits. And it's not a big deal to fix that. You simply have to go and reset that circuit breaker and turn off one of those items that had suddenly overloaded the circuit. The circuit breaker is a great device for us because it's there. It's a great safety feature. And when you get all those things going, your circuit breakers typical would be like a 15 amp circuit in a home. But when you get that space heater and the curlers and the vacuum cleaner going, and all of a sudden it goes from 15 amps of current through there to 16 or 17 or 18, and the circuit breaker is going, warning, warning, and it just flips to prevent the wire from overheating and creating a fire. So it's an easy thing for us to reset this circuit breaker. Well, sometimes you and I need to reset our spiritual circuit breaker. We're off track. Maybe we've overloaded. When we assess our actions, we may find some areas in our life that need to be reset. The first step in that process, if you're going to do a spiritual reset, the first step is to remember. Remember to forget. Remember to forget. Mr. McGee brought a great little article from the newspaper in this morning. It's the Dear Abby column. It's titled, New Decade Brings Positive Resolutions. And some points I would like to share from this. And this is what Dear Abby is saying that she'd gotten from her mother. Just for today, I will live through this day only. I will not brood about yesterday or obsess about tomorrow. How many people's lives would change totally if they quit brooding about yesterday and last month and last year and 20 years ago? They can't let go of the past. And worrying about tomorrow, I've preached about how we are not called to worry. God has given us a spirit of freedom. But people can't let go of the past. I'm so concerned about tomorrow. I'm going to live for today. I'm going to do what I can because I don't know that I have tomorrow guaranteed to me. Just for today, I will be happy. We've known some folks who choose to be unhappy. Just for today, I will make a conscious effort to be agreeable. How many of you have ever known someone who chose to be disagreeable? All day, every day. It's like, why? Maybe that's what makes them happy. She goes on and she shares a prayer from St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, let me sow pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console. To be understood as to understand. Not to be loved, but to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. As in dying that we are born to be eternal life. We die. Paul wrote about how we die to ourselves. So if we're going to reset, God has some guidance for us. In Isaiah chapter 43, the prophet writes, do not remember the past events. Pay no attention to things of old. Do not remember past events. God is very explicit. Says, let it go. Turn it loose. Pay no attention to things of old. And we struggle with that. I've known people who want to beat themselves up again and again and again over whatever it was in their past. It changes nothing other than making you miserable now and often making others around you equally miserable. God says, do not remember the past events. There's a reason God tells us that. It's for your mental health. It's for the health of those around you. It's for the relationships. And God goes on, he says, look, I'm about to do something new. Even now it is coming. Do you not see it? Indeed, I will make a way in the wilderness, rivers in the desert. So God tells us, forget your mistakes. Forget those old actions. I have something new I'm about to unveil. It's about to happen. Do you see it? Do you see it now? That's what God is telling us. God does this because he knows that we cannot move forward as long as we're looking behind us. If we have 2020 vision, that means we have reviewed our efforts, our work from the past, And then we've decided we're going to focus forward. I hope and pray none of you are driving down the highway and your focus is on the rear view mirror rather than on the windshield. That you're looking at what's behind you rather than what's in front of you. But so many people, that's how they spend their life, looking in the rear view mirror about what's behind them. To reset, that means there's an action is required, a commitment to take action, to change. Now, let's be honest. How many of you really like change? I could tell from some expressions like, well, that depends on what it is. Depends on what it is. Paul's probably looking forward to the change of retiring versus going to work every day. Probably anticipating that. Depends on the change. But God doesn't always qualify those, does he? If we're going to reset, we have to make a commitment to take action. Procrastination is not our friend when it comes to the work that we're called to do by our Creator. Billy Graham told the story of a gentleman named Billy Bray. Billy Bray was a saintly minister of another generation, and Billy Bray is sitting beside the bedside of a dying friend. And this dying friend had been very reluctant, very timid about witnessing for Christ. And on his deathbed, this dying man is saying, if I had the power, I'd shout, glory to God. Whereupon Pastor Billy Bray replied, it's a pity you didn't shout glory when you had the power. Isn't that a bad time and a sad time to say, if I had the power, I'd sing glory for God when my time has passed? In John 9:4, Jesus speaks to this very thing for us. He said, we must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. We must do the work of him who is coming, or who sent me while it is day, because night is coming when no one can work. Jesus is saying, we have a brief time. There's a very limited window of opportunity for us to do what we are called to do. So if we're going to have 2020 vision, it means first we have to review. Second, we have to reset. And third, we have to recommit. Have you ever known anyone who struggled with commitment? I preached a funeral for a lady. She'd been married for a number of years. But when she started seeing this gentleman, he came to her house and had Sunday dinner every Sunday for 14 years before he finally proposed. I think he had trouble committing to anything other than Sunday dinner. We have to recommit our lives, dedicate our lives to serving God. What is it that enables people to be successful? Well, maybe it's dedication. Dedication is what enables this scrawny middle school kid to become a high school star, maybe even get a college scholarship somewhere. Dedication is what enables a kid from a really poor family to go to college, become a doctor, an attorney, a scientist, to become a valuable contributing member of society. See, a person can have a lot of intelligence, financial security, social status, unlimited opportunities, and those factors still don't guarantee that you're going to be a success in life. Why is it that people don't commit? Sometimes when we look at it, we look at what God has called us to do, the challenges. I mean, the challenges seem like they're as tall as Mount Everest, and there's no way I can climb Mount Everest. When I look at the breadth of them, they're as big as the Pacific Ocean. There's no way I can swim across the Pacific Ocean. This is just more than I can do, God. You called the wrong person, and I won't commit, let alone recommit. Surrender can seem like the best course of action. But it's not what God wants us to do. In 2 Corinthians, we read, therefore we do not give up. We do not give up. Even though our outer person is being destroyed, our inner person is being renewed day by day. So if I failed yesterday, if I stumbled the day before, if I hiccuped the day before that, we're being renewed day by day. Giving up is not an option in God's world, in God's work. We also have to be very cognizant of the fact that I can't just delegate what God has called me to do. I can't just simply show up and say, Mr. McGee, I think you need to preach this morning. I could do that, What would your response be to that, Mr. McGee? You think we'd be out in 2 hours? Probably out in 2 minutes, wouldn't we? We can't delegate what God has called us individually to do. In Galatians 6 we read, for each person will have to carry his own load. Is that hard for some people to think about? Some people say, I would rather someone else take this because it's the hard job. It's the rough work. And I don't necessarily want to do that. So I would like you to do this or you to do that. Each person has to carry their own load. Verse 6, the one who is taught the message must share all his good things with the teacher. Shortly, we're going to be joining together to share in Holy Communion. What does it mean to you to be able to participate in the Lord's Supper? Hopefully, it's more than just a routine event. This is a very special time. It's so meaningful because of what the elements represent. It's a special time because these brief moments in the Lord's Supper can totally change someone's perspective. It gives them new lenses to look through in their life. A gentleman named Curry Picard shared a touching account that demonstrates the power of this ordinance of the Lord's Supper. He says, in 1999, the church I was serving designated a particular Sunday morning service for celebrating the lives of our shut-ins. Every effort was made to get them to church that day. We highly encouraged their family to make arrangements and had volunteers to step up if that didn't work. After the service, Curry says, I received a note from one family member, and the names have been changed in this. Grandma thought it'd be some kind of coffee and cookies get-together for the shut-ins and their families. Thus, she told us it's very important for us to be there by 9 o'clock a.m. Worship started at 9:30. The lady had written, quite frankly, I was not overly enthused to have to arrive in Grand Rapids Saturday night in order to have coffee and cookies with the shut-ins at 9 a.m. Sunday. It's a 2-hour drive from our home. Little did we know what a blessing God had in store for us. As it turned out, we were invited to God's table at 9:30. We sat in the back row and took the chairs apart, so I sat on one side of Grandma's wheelchair, and my husband, Bob, her son, sat on her left. Through the years, Grandma has irritated and offended me in many ways. She was probably unaware of it. It's just the way she is. I would mentally forgive and forgive and forgive. Then the next bark would come. More recently, I just gave up and decided since she doesn't value me, I wouldn't be particularly appreciative of her. However, I did continue to treat her well. Communion was served from the right and passed to me. Grandma is unable to feed herself. So guess who was in line to feed her the body of our Lord? Now, how can you do that with ill feelings in your heart? It was truly a blessing. It was a poignant moment. Our thanks to the church and praise and thanks to God who knew ahead of time what he had in store for us. This morning, as we prepare for the Lord's Supper, I would ask that you spend some time before we begin in private prayer. That you would review and say, God, what is in my heart right now? Is there someone that I've got some ill will toward? Is there someone in the church that I need to speak with and apologize and ask for forgiveness? Is there something in my life I need to change because this is the Lord's Supper we're speaking of? I would ask that you would review and maybe do that spiritual reset. Throw that spiritual circuit breaker and say, Lord, I want to reconnect with you. I've disconnected from your power source, and I know that I'm worse off for that. I want you to reconnect with me. And then third, recommit. What better time to recommit than on the first Sunday of a new year? And we do that by beginning with the Lord's Supper.